I'm David Broker. I'm the CEO of the Indiana Bioscience Research Institute.
Adam Collins, Deputy Mayor for Economic Development with Mayor Greg Ballard's office.
Steve Van Zulen, Director of Strategic Planning and Real Estate for Eli Lilly and Company.
Janet Thomas, Managing Associate for IDEO Incorporated, Commercial Interior Design.
Paul Moses, I'm with the Purdue Research Foundation.
My name's Sean Conway. I'm with the Bradley Company, and I focus in on healthcare and biosciences from the real estate perspective.
And I'm Kep Carmichael, partner with Barnes & Thornburg in the corporate group and co-chair of the Life Sciences practice group. I'm your moderator for today, so certainly the least important person up here. We're here to get the insights and knowledge and guidance from our speakers today. Hopefully this will be a conversational panel, and we're not intending to do this as a presidential debate with a moderator asking probing questions of each individual speaker, but really just introducing some topics to generate some conversation among the various speakers. So just to maybe kick things off, I think it would be helpful to get some kind of understanding from the various perspectives of the life science real estate consumers, in both from the entrepreneurial perspective, startup perspective, as well as more established big pharma perspective, and maybe just starting with more the big pharma perspective from Eli Lilly, just get a sense of what your involvement in and what you're seeing in the real estate market, both locally here in Indianapolis as well as nationally, and what Lilly's objectives, current objectives in their life science facilities.
Yeah, thanks, Kep. As far as Eli Lilly and Company, really we have three types of assets. We have labs, we have manufacturing, we have office. Typically we own our manufacturing assets, but as I've been in this role for, 13 years now, there's been a shift, not only within Eli Lilly and Company, but really within big pharma and big biopharma, to be open to not owning everything you occupy. And so when I took this role, we had very few leased facilities. Most of it was owned, both here and globally. And now we've got significant leasehold assets in clusters around the United States and some other leasehold assets outside the United States as well. So I think, Kep, what we've seen, and when I talk to my colleagues in other pharma companies, is there's an openness to being co-located near and around other people. We're less about covering our paper, and we want to be more in those ecosystems that David, I'm sure, will talk about later. But we want to be around other people that are doing things like we are, and we want to be in those epicenters of research, whether it's universities, institutes, and like-minded folks.
Paul, maybe you can give us a little bit of perspective of what you're seeing from in your role with the Purdue Research Foundation, what you're seeing from the startups, some of the entrepreneurs, more than development stage, and what they're looking for in their facilities.
Yeah, I think across our research parks, and we have 5 now across the state, each one's a little different, and really they're focused on what's going on in that particular market that surrounds them. Early stage companies in particular often don't know what the real costs are for running a wet lab, let's say, at least initially. Many come out of bigger companies, are spinning out a company perhaps, and are exploring the new budgets and what it costs to actually operate a facility like that. What we try to do, and what we see, is people end up getting a wet lab, maybe a couple of offices, and hopefully they continue to grow and expand. Our dilemma is wet lab space is expensive to build, and we are charged with being good stewards with the money we're entrusted with at PRF. So it's a juggle. Somebody walks in and says, I need a wet lab today, and that often happens with startup companies because they suddenly got their new funding and they're ready to get to work. And we can turn around shell and core kind of space into wet lab pretty quickly, 3 months, 4 months. But you kind of have to educate the early stage companies on what it takes to do that, that there's a little more expense in running a wet lab, and so it's a process we go through.
Paul, we had talked a little bit earlier at the breakfast of many of these startups, entrepreneurs that are, and the researchers that are coming in with their ideas. Are many times coming from institutions where they're just given a budget, a research budget, and so many times they look for their capital funding based merely on that budget, and many times the facilities cost isn't incorporated into that budget. Are you seeing that with some of the entrepreneurs, and what can the developers do to maybe possibly get out in front and help educate what those costs may, the real estate costs may involve?
Well, I think getting involved as early as possible with the companies. So often they self-identify, and you don't find out about them until, as a developer, I guess, you don't find out about them until they walk in your door, until you're introduced to them at an event like this, those kinds of things. So, I mean, from my standpoint, it's important to be out really involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. For a life science company in this particular ecosystem, because of the strength of the Indianapolis market in that regard, and then really just working it, so to speak.
Sean, you're what is it now, 20, 30 plus years in the life science industry. You've seen a lot of developing trends and kind of the arc of the life sciences industry. What are you seeing right now in your role, and in how those trends are affecting the real estate market and the objectives of your clients and the real estate products that are available to them?
Let me just, thanks for that question. Let me just chime off, build off of your points that you made. By the way, can you do that space in 2 months?
Yes.
I think it's really incumbent, and I have my peers here in the industry to know the role that a broker can play as well. We are out there beating the bush, talking to the people in the space, specialize and focus here. If we don't have the answers around costs, we can dig them up and try to find them. So we try to educate and add value that way to our clients so that when they do show up at your door, they're ready. And it's really a softball here. I'm going to throw it over to David, because one of the barriers to entry, we all know that we're doing very well here in Indianapolis around the IT space with Exact Target, and we've had a Primo, we've had a lot, software, going back to software artistry. But it's a huge barrier to entry. And as an example, I'm working with a client right now that they have a 2-month window to find a office tech space. And if it takes 3 months or 4 to build it out, we've got a lot of work to do. And I think that's a big challenge. There's, we're asked if we track this space. There's not a lot of space around lab type tech space to track. So having the help, if you will, of either developers or the larger companies that have excess space, or what David is going to embark on, is going to be very helpful. So I'll throw it over to David to segue right off of that.
What kind of question do you want me to?
How will 16 Tech help us all to find space?
So, we're the IBRI, and we're working very closely with, obviously, what's happened at 16 Tech. For the IBRI, just a little bit of background, the IBRI is a standalone institution focused on attracting talent to Indianapolis, talent that otherwise wouldn't be here. Talent that, as Steve Van Zuylen mentioned, if you look at the Lillys, you look at the Roches, you look at the Dows, the Cooks, the orthopedic companies, they're all dependent upon sources of discovery and innovation that don't reside in their 4 walls. They've got scientists of their own, they've got engineers of their own, they're doing those jobs. But around the edges of that, depending upon the company, they're constantly looking at trying to work with and collaborate with research scientists around the world. And so the goal of the IBRI, quite honestly, is to try to attract somewhere between 150 to 200 of these people to Indianapolis that otherwise wouldn't be here, with a focus on metabolic disease, diabetes, obesity, the complications like cardiovascular complications that come with metabolic disorders. So our goal as the IBRI is to try to figure out how to recruit these people. And one of the important things in recruiting these people, and in particular the right type of person, we're not an academic institution, so we don't want to recruit just an academic researcher. What we're interested in is recruiting someone who's going to do outstanding research, but wants to then see that research translated into innovation. So they're going to need the type of space, facilities, place, connections, opportunity to collaborate that pulls all of that together. Classic example is we're in a temporary facility right now off of 16th Street that's in the BRTC building. This is an IU building that was built about 15 years ago, and we're on the entire third floor. So the IBRI sits on the third floor. We're the nonprofit research organization on that third floor. But we've also taken half of the laboratory space on the second floor. Why? Because we want to use that as this commercial space, space for startup, so that researcher can be doing his job on the third floor, supporting IBRI activities, and if it's a good enough idea and he can get funding, we've got IP and other things, he can then just literally walk down to the second floor into his commercial lab, and maybe some of his team walks down into the second floor. And it's that close, it's that easy, it's literally one flight of stairs separated. So for us, what was important in terms of thinking about the future and the permanent nature of the IBRI is, where's this, what kind of place do we need in order to sort of bring all of these things together? And so that was 16 Tech. And so 16 Tech is, the idea is, how can you create an innovation community that's not just the IBRI, but more importantly, all the other things, assets, mixed use, whether that's research space, whether that's collaboration space, whether that's retail space, residential space, all of those things coming together. So 16 Tech now is an idea that's been, actually goes back, Steve and I were talking at breakfast, how long, 5 years, 10 years? At that particular northwest area of Indianapolis, 16 Tech has been an idea, but there have been some challenges, and we can get into some of those challenges. Why has it taken this long to get here? But essentially, 16 Tech is now this place where we're trying to bring all these assets together, and we couldn't have done it without a lot of people sitting up here. My congratulations and compliments to Adam and the current mayor for helping us with regard to the real estate portion of this and getting the land. We're this close to finalizing it, but getting the land that's going to enable us to sort of move into this area. And then I don't know if people tracked what happened with the city council last night, but under Maggie Lewis and the city council, they voted unanimously 23-0 in terms of approving a $75 million TIF financing to put in place and begin to do the infrastructure upgrades and requirements for this particular area. So we're very excited to be able now to say, we're ultimately going to move into this place called 16 Tech that's going to be a broad innovation community, and that'll be one more aspect of trying to recruit this talent. And it's all about talent and talent attraction and the good things that come by bringing those people together.
I'd just like to add something to that. It's the ecosystem that you build. That's what excites me about 16 Tech. We have at the mothership, as I call it, up in West Lafayette, our largest research park, we have close to 160 companies. They're not all life science companies, but a lot of that, we have a lot of rock star faculty that know how to start business and have started several. And what's exciting is when you have a place like you're talking about that enables that interaction and that creative workflow, in terms of if failure is part of it. If a company if it fails, there's another company right there to pick up those people and keep them in the local community, keep them in the workforce locally, and it works. We have more square footage under incubation than any other entity in the U.S. and it's exciting when you see new ones coming along, and I think it's going to be great.
And if I can add on to what Paul said, I think from an economic development perspective, this is a big challenge we have in a certain subset of industries in Indianapolis. If you look at really the 4 or 5 crucial industries that we focus on, we really struggle in the collaboration between the universities, our large companies, and how do we create this small business startup environment. The days of going out and trying to attract an Eli Lilly to pick up and move from Indianapolis and, go somewhere else, or hopefully over, I would think. But as an economic development strategy, that's something that's really, kind of becomes a little bit of a race to the bottom. You can't go seek out these big companies and just offer abatements. As a city, you have to find a way to create an environment where people want to be, where talent wants to be located, to some extent just echoing here what David said. So, and most importantly, where that really provides the economic development benefit is in the startup, small companies that are really growing, 25 to 50. And that's where you really see the job growth take off. It's a known fact, I think, now in economic development that large companies are job killers, not always job creators. You get a lot of consolidation. So when you look at the growth that you want to have, it's really got to be focused in that small business, in that small business area. And so for us, when we look at what the city's done very effectively or not effectively in the past, I don't know if this is a statement about all mayor's administrations or just Mayor Ballard's, but I don't think we've been very good at programming. That's not really what our strength is. What we've been good at, I think more or less, is transactionally real estate based. So we've said we can find the placemaking, we can help create the space. Those are where we have the tools. We have the TIF financing, we have tax abatement, we have CTP funds, other things that are very related to the real estate and infrastructure. What we can't do is provide the programming. So if you go back and look at 16 Tech and its history, this was actually an idea that was started, I think, in 2002 under Mayor Peterson with a Battelle report that was done in conjunction with Mayor Peterson's office and CICP. They came back and looked and created this idea of a life sciences district. In 2008, the mayor's office created the 16 Tech Steering Committee, which had, I think Steve was on it and some other folks who are here today. But the steering committee was a big, broad group focused on how do we create this kind of area. Well, fast forward 2008, almost 8 years later, we finally got to a point where there's a lot of real potential in 16 Tech. And the reason for that is because of the IBRI. So we really found what we think is our private sector program, or our center of gravity for that space. So we have someone that can really create the type of environment that are going to that's going to attract other similarly minded people and similarly minded companies. So I think this is, for me at least, is I look at kind of retrospect a classic example of what a city can really do well. They can find a space, they can prep it, they can provide the tools, but a city will really struggle unless you have the right kind of entity that wants to come in and build that programming around it. So there was a lot of, I think, good luck for all of us in how this played out relative to the IBRI, the state's investment, and the timing as it relates to the city.
If I can add one thing there, Adam, I don't think we should underestimate what happened last night, because if you look at the clusters around the United States, if you look at Cambridge, that was driven by MIT largely. If you look at RTP, that was driven by a need to figure out a different focus when the industries down there were failing. If you look at what has happened in St. Louis, which I know David and the team have looked at extensively, that was institutions coming together. And what Purdue has done, you need a catalyst in the form of a public entity, and in this case, the city, and then the institute that's funded by many of our companies and the government. And so, I mean, this is very, very exciting. Could be a potential game changer for our city, and that's what we all hope it's going to be as well. So again, Adam, good job on getting that done.
This is the nice thing when you have an unofficial, unpaid advisor to the mayor's office. He'll do your PR for you. So
it really is a big deal. I mean, yeah, I'm right with you on the programming being a key part of it. It's not about the buildings. It really is all about the connections and the programming, connections to capital, the connections to research institutions and other legacy companies in your community, and this is it's going to be an excellent hub for that. It's like a major hub for a wheel that hopefully spreads throughout your community.
Yeah, we probably could not have scheduled this conference for a better morning, right after. I mean, it sounds like this. It just all of a sudden, it was a quick little process. But as David and everyone has talked about, this has been many years coming, and for it to be approved, the financing to be approved at the City County Council level last night was fantastic. It is a very big event, and maybe, David, you had hinted at it before. Maybe walk through some of the real challenges that you talked about, running these challenges in parallel path, and now all of a sudden they're starting to come together. But
Well, again, I think that this is an idea that goes back 10 plus years, but it's sort of like, why didn't it happen? And I think there's lots of things that in the last, let's say, year, we've worked on, slowly tried to chip away at. One is a common vision. That was the most important thing, was getting people together and helping everybody see what was possible. And so, with the help of many of the folks sitting up here as well as others, we had a series of meetings to sort of essentially master plan what the next 20 years could look like at 16 Tech. And so getting a common and shared vision was critical and number one. Number two, then, out of that plan came the need for, obviously, the infrastructure and the support from the city and from the city council in terms of, if you look at that site of 16 Tech, and again, just for people's benefit, we kind of define it from 10th Street, just north of Fall Creek. There's Fall Creek there, just north of 10th Street. White River runs on the west side of that. Fall Creek actually goes up. If you look at it, it crosses under Indiana Avenue and goes up north. And then really the only land portion of 16 Tech is 16th Street. So you almost have a peninsula there that the only way you can get onto that property is either Indiana Avenue, which is kind of an askew street, or 16th Street. So the idea of how do you connect that site to the medical school and the IUPUI campus to the south, and now with the announcement of what's going to happen over at IU Health and Methodist Hospital, how does 16th Street sort of become a corridor then to get over to there? So this area now that's about 40 or 50 acres is being described as 16 Tech, called 16 Tech. Getting the infrastructure right was critical. So, and it's an active utility field. We've got Citizens Energy, the water station there. So master vision or master plan, common vision. What is it going to take in terms of investment to really sort of prep and prepare the site to be what we now will enable the master vision was important. And then the third and equally probably the most important thing in the long run is you've got multiple property owners there. Of the nonprofits that are there, you've got obviously the IBRI coming in, you've got IU Health, you've got Eskenazi, you've got IU, Indiana University. And so trying to get them to work together to enact that master plan is critical. So we've developed what's called now the 16 Tech Community Corporation. It's a nonprofit supporting organization to those other nonprofits. And it will have a board, and it will have a budget, and it will have an operating staff ultimately hired. This is the model of Cortex, what happened in St. Louis. But that group and that board is ultimately then going to be responsible for enacting and enabling that master plan and looking for tenants, looking for people to come into it, and really achieving the vision of the next 20 years. So all of those things had to come together.
And if I can add on to a point David made, I think there were two that really challenges that stuck out to me. One is, you mentioned government, university, healthcare. As people in this room know, not necessarily, the groups in the city who have the highest appetite for risk, right? So, you've got those three groups coming together, and you want to ask them to turn what is really 1950s era warehouses into this innovation district. It takes a little bit more probably, vision and risk than those folks are really used to. So I think that's a challenge just with the kind of bureaucracy of the entities themselves that you're dealing with. So, for us, I think that was and will continue to be a really big challenge. But again, having the private sector and others, Dr. Licklider was highly involved in getting folks motivated to come and push that this was really more and more important. So I think we've gotten over that hump, for now, and hopefully we have the opportunity as a city to kind of, pour this infrastructure, see the investment and development come on, which will make it, in my opinion, much, much easier for somebody to jump out and take that risk in the, coming years.
you had mentioned, one of the things you mentioned, Adam, is the unique type of space. This is not just your typical, warehousing space. I mean, there are unique needs and expensive needs for some of these for these tenants that are coming in to develop in the life sciences. And maybe Sean, you can talk a little bit about some of those needs that your clients are looking for, and the trends in the life sciences industry that are pushing on those needs, and that are particular to your clients and the industry.
Just for some perspective, you mentioned time in industry. I've got 18 years directly in the healthcare and biosciences space. I began my career after time in the Marine Corps, and any Marines out there, happy birthday today. I started out with Allergan. I spent time with GE Medical Systems. That's what got me down here in Indianapolis from Minnesota. And then Thermo Fisher Scientific, 12 years, I'm a CCIM in commercial real estate, worked with companies like BioStorage and Nico Neuro and Indigo Biosystems and others here in the area. The challenges are many. I alluded earlier to startups in the IT space versus this space. There still are barriers to entry and timing. There's a lot of changes going on. It's transformational. I recently gave a TED type talk to the Indiana Association of Realtors, and the essence of the message was, whether you are a direct or indirect consumer of healthcare, or you are an agent or commercial or real estate, whatever, the transformational change has come to the healthcare industry, and thus the life sciences industry as well, upstream. How is it impacting you? And I'll let the other panelists address that, because at the end of the day, it's still, as we cluster and we do what we do, we're about solving problems in the marketplace. So these startup companies are juggling. I really admire the entrepreneurs that take on this challenge, because they're trying to solve these problems, the vast technical problems. They're trying to manage staff. They're trying to raise money. And oh, by the way, they're trying to find a platform space to do it in. So the real estate development community, the brokerage community can be of great assistance, but only so far. So I think one of the questions for the panelists is, we still have this barrier to find that space. It's expensive space. A lot of our developers are not going to build spec lab space. They're just not going to do it. The risk is too high. So how do we address the issue of having some space? Is there going to be collaborative type space where companies can come in and out and maybe use it on a cost use per basis? Or how can we address that? I think as a community, understandably as a community, we're trying to bring all those entities together too for these entrepreneurs to help solve those problems. So those are some of the things I've seen in the course of my years in the industry.
I think touch on that. That's one thing that we're challenged with, particularly in West Lafayette as well, because we have a lot of new companies that are spinning out of the foundry operations that are going on campus, and a lot of them come to us with immediate need for wet lab. Just got a big STTR, SBIR, and man, we got to get to work in a lab. Do you have one? And we're 100% full right now when it comes to wet labs. So in an expansion that we're going to do within the next year of our main facility, or one of our incubation facilities up there where our offices are, we're entertaining the idea, and I think we're going to do it if I can talk Dan into it. We're going to do a shared lab, much like the ones that I've seen out in Silicon Valley in use. As really being a first stop for, we'll probably do a bio and a chemical lab, separate labs, and then have it be a first stop for those earliest stage companies. I think that kind of shared facility, at least in that ecosystem up there, we have would go. It would go well, much like co-space or collaborative space or whatever brand we hang on it or name we hang on it. I think that there's a demand there for that. The bottom line is the work environment for life science companies and for all the companies that are out there is changing. That makes broadband more important, fiber to your facilities and the ability to interact virtually critical, and as healthcare changes, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Taking a clinical trial is going to change the dynamic of it, as people can do that participate from their homes. So really looking out as far as you can into the future and making sure that you have the infrastructure in place to support the dynamics of the changing economy are critical, I think.
Steve, how is Lilly approaching those issues with the demand and the? I think you had mentioned before that you're looking to more of a collaborative approach and not necessarily looking to own everything. Is that being driven by some of the changes in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, it's really being driven by the fact that we can't discover everything. We think we can. We'd like to, because that would be better for hopefully all of us here too. But we know there are a lot of smart people who either don't want to work for a large company or just want to do their own thing. And so we have collaborations in New York. We have collaborations out in San Diego, in Philadelphia, where we're by University of Pennsylvania. And so these ecosystems that we've heard people refer to up here several times is really what is important, we think, at least, to drug discovery. We have our own ecosystem within Eli Lilly and Company over at our discovery site, but we realize that's a small universe compared to everything that's going on. As it relates to user needs, it is a little chicken and egg thing, right? If you build it, will they come? Well, you got to put a lot of money in these buildings. They're not cheap. And then based on whatever they're doing, whatever science they're doing, what other type of chemicals or products or whatever they're going after, also has nuances. Some from a development standpoint, to just build a lab building and then hope you fill it is a tough nut unless you have a lot of money and a lot of patience. So that's why, again, getting back to 16 Tech and David and the Institute and what the developers hopefully will do there is start to create the engine. Create the engine where folks will then want to say, guys, I'll build a 50,000 square foot lab building because I know people are coming out of it, whether it's coming out of the Institute, whether it's coming out of people who go there, whether it's coming from Purdue, one of the research parks there. But you need that inertia to start because it's hard to guess user requirements. And just an illustration of that, Lilly bought a company a number of years ago, and they had a high throughput screening technology. And we built a building down in RTP, is about 150,000 feet, to house this high throughput screening. Well, fast forward 6 years, that technology that took 150,000 feet, we moved it into 25,000 feet over here on our campus and sold the building. So, the technology changes so swiftly that I don't even think we can imagine what it might be doing, 4 or 5 years from now.
Sean, you're nodding your head. It sounds like
Well, absolutely. Concur. Along this journey of my own, I spent time around the regulatory side, and then most recently consulting a telemedicine company here in town, and then also dealing with outcomes. We're not even the comparative effectiveness, the demands that the pharma folks have today are immense. And I guess to segue off Steve, my guess is he's right. Coming out of the real estate back into technology, it was surprising. It's moving so much faster than the real estate world is. It's moving light years fast. And so the efforts of these folks here is to, obviously to help us embrace that and to keep up. And it's all impacting real estate. You referenced clinical trials. We were dealing with telemedicine, remote monitoring of patients, and utilizing that as a tool to impact them. In fact, Magoozy was a spin out from Lilly at the time. It's all happening fast, and I think the smart ones are going to get ahead of it and use the real estate as a platform to leverage their business. So that's kind of what I'm seeing happening. A lot of it's timing. So.
Steve, you had mentioned the company that Lilly had acquired, and M&A consolidation in the life sciences industry is continuing, and people are recognizing that they can't invent everything and develop everything themselves, so they're looking out there for the acquisition targets. Obviously, the real estate and the facility sometimes, and I think as you mentioned earlier, is the tail of the acquisition dog. But how do you approach dealing with your facilities and identifying the facilities that you've now acquired to use that space? And is it a retrofit decision? Is it a disposition decision? And how do you deal with that because of the unique nature of some of these high-tech research facilities that are not easily converted into another use?
Yeah, that's a good question. And fortunately for us, our leadership, Dr. Lechleiter, has maintained the go it alone, and we'll acquire smaller folks, but we're not doing the big major mergers like GSK and Merck and Pfizer has done. So from our perspective, we haven't been inundated with redundant facilities to the extent those folks have. I've talked with my colleagues in those companies, and it's a bloody nightmare for them to figure out, okay, I've got 5 plants in Ireland, and I don't need all of them. Who am I going to sell them to? Because once they bought everybody, they don't have an audience to sell them to. The acquisitions that Lilly has done have typically been smaller as far as the companies, and our approach really has been, with the exception of the recent Novartis, to kind of leave them alone. We bought Imclone out in New Jersey, New York, and we've left them alone, and they're operating and they're doing great. Same with the company bought in San Diego. We folded them into Lilly, but we're leaving them kind of be. We don't want to screw them up by bringing them, into the kind of the corporate dynamic completely. But the Novartis Animal Health one is one we've been working on this year, and Jeff Lupker's out there, and he's been highly engaged with us as well. And that is, we had to look across 42 countries on all these spaces that they had and look and say, okay, we've got 5 locations in country X. Country manager, you were just named yesterday as country manager, what's your strategy? And they have no idea. They don't even know how many people work for them, let alone know what their strategy for their country is. So from a real estate perspective, we kind of have to lead the witness in that degree and talk about, well, you've got, this attributes in this space, you've got this, lease obligation here if you walk away. Here's the capabilities that, we're hearing from your leadership that you may need. And we become as much of a real estate advisor as really helping them identify things that they should probably be concerned about. They'll make the ultimate decision, but we help them in that regard, and that's where kind of the strategy of it comes in. We try not to just be, hey, here's your options, what do you want? We try to help them through that. And then when it does come to disposition, then you've got to figure out, okay, what's the value of this thing? Because somebody's got to put an amount in a restructuring column or reserve for it in their budget. And, we know we're going to be wrong no matter what we say. We just don't want to be that much wrong. And so that's, very difficult to predict where things are going to go.
Changing gears a little bit, Janet, you offer a unique perspective in understanding more specific requirements of some of your clients in designing and building space for your life science clients. Be interesting to know what the new or what the current trend of requirements and what types of spaces you're being asked to develop for them.
Sure. IDEO has been a small business partner with Lilly for over 2 decades. So we have been very closely involved in their research facilities and their manufacturing facilities. What we have noticed over the years is it has changed dramatically. It was a very closed, very private, sort of privately held company. It is now much, much more collaborative in terms of space. Square footage is expensive. The labs are expensive to build. They were always very customized in the past, which was very expensive when the science changed and you needed to step forward and talk more directly to what the new technology was that was driving the science. What we've seen is it's not just a change in the way of the labs. They become much more open. They're multi-people labs. They're shared labs. They're sharing equipment. They're sharing technology. They're also creating those adjoining spaces that encourage them to come together and talk. And it's just been a big transition. So what we do is we work closely with for the most part here in Indianapolis, it's their existing facilities to realign the different therapeutic groups as they change and sort of shrink and grow, and then work with the scientists to help them figure out what the space is that they need, and then help to get that reconstructed and help them to move into it. While we have absolutely enjoyed our time with Lilly, we also have built relationships with the LifeSciences locally. When he talked about the facility in RTP, IDEO actually went out to North Carolina and helped move all of that equipment back to Indianapolis and put it into the Discovery facilities locally. So that was a big challenge, and they all flew back on Christmas Eve in a big giant snowstorm. So it was kind of an event for them. But we also have relationships with IU Health, Eskenazi, Purdue, Riley's Children's Hospital, just kind of helping to focus on that life science sector and trying to figure out, again, how do you bring those people together? How do you build a facility from the inside that will attract the new talent, that'll bring the young people in, that'll bring these gifted scientists and researchers and academics to Indianapolis and make this a different kind of city than it has been in the past.
One of the consistent themes that I think I've heard today in this discussion is the move toward a collaborative approach at all levels, both at the research and development level, but also just the overall operations and collaborative use of the facilities, which has been a shift, I think most people would admit, over the past couple of decades. And part of that is also moving to kind of the public-private partnerships and that type of collaborative event. And I know, Adam, you spoke, you touched briefly and obviously on the big news about 16 Tech and that funding, but maybe help us understand a little more about the city's approach to filling, the government filling some of those gaps that the private side needs to develop here in Indianapolis, and what we're doing to attract that talent and that infrastructure here.
That's a great question. I don't know that we ever do enough. You know, with 50 days left, I get to do a lot of telling the next administration what they should do, you know, which is a nice feeling for once. But, you know, one of the things I think we've really struggled with across the board is, as we've came and looked, again, Indiana's tools are very, I think, outdated compared to some of what you'll see in other municipalities, or not even municipalities, but states. The state of Maryland has put something like $200 million in the life science industry in the last 5 to 10 years in cash. So in a different way than we do via tax increment financing. So from a tool perspective, we can kind of be challenged. And traditionally, how we're trying to help people is from really, you know, a tax abatement structure or a TIF structure. What I think we would really encourage the, you know, next administration to look at a lot is what you're hearing, you know, about trying to find a need for flexible space. That's what we hear every day, and it's across a variety of different sectors. So whether it's a tech sector, whether it's a life sector, they're all kind of screaming, clamoring for this space. In addition, we're looking at different ways to deal with really what's a lease term issue. So, you know, this has been kind of brought up, right? Your company comes in, developer's asking them, or a building owner's asking them to sign a 5-year lease. They're saying in 2 years, I'm either going to be 500%, you know, employment level, or I'm going to be broke. So, you know, I don't know that it makes sense to do this. So, you know, when we look at that, and then we look at spaces downtown, like the office towers where, you know, we have a lot of vacancy. Again, you know, some of the things I think we've started to look at but haven't finished is how do we find a way to marry up, you know, the areas where we really have the opportunity in space with what our needs are, and how can the city get involved more creatively in trying to find a way to maybe backstop the term of a lease. One of the things that I've been very surprised at in taking this job is, you know, we always felt like the city was the last person to know what was going on, you know, in terms of a deal and who needed space. We always thought that brokers really had all that information on the front end. What I've come to find out is that the city, through Develop Indy and some of its partners, really gets a lot of that information on the front end. So, you know, to some extent, can the city come step in and say, we see a pipeline of companies that are 25 to 50 people that need space on a regular basis. So how do we find a way again, to backstop a building owner's risk on a term and take and act a little bit more proactively to put folks in those spaces. I think another kind of opportunity for us going forward is going to be capital. One of the things you always hear about is, venture capital and how, the Midwest suffers as it compares to the coast. And I think other cities have looked at really innovative ways to put cash into companies that are starting and growing. And so here in Indy, we started a pilot program in the last 6 months. Amarsis, which is a company that came from Austria, a tech company that chose to locate in Indianapolis, and then Aperio, which moved their North American headquarters from San Francisco to Indy, both tech companies, again, not life sciences. We've been able to use cash from a TIF perspective to help them with training to get them to locate here. So, we've looked at that and said, can we find a way to create a repeatable program where the city can go invest in companies based upon kind of a competitive process to give them a little bit more of an opportunity to grow. So those are, I think, a few of the things that, we've looked at and said, we really think those are opportunities for wins going forward, and we need to find ways to kind of update our traditional models and the way we go about doing business. But, until that point comes, I think in the, very near future, what you're going to continue to see from the city is more of the traditional placemaking. So, I've heard people talk about, we need to find, again, that collaborative space that people can come in, the wet labs where they change, where they offer that on a speculative basis. I can tell you the city would, at least for the next 50 days, would be willing.
I'm listening.
That's the kind of stuff that we'd wholeheartedly would have been willing to invest in. The problem is finding the operator. And where we've really found the gap here historically is that, the city's got no business operating it. Nobody will ever want to come. It'll be poorly managed. It'll be poorly marketed. So we stay out of that business. But we've been looking, and there are a couple areas of things that'll go around with 16 Tech, where we have a couple of national operators. And the tension for your politicians is, everybody wants to see it done locally. They said, well, we've got this really great operator. So Tech Shop is one of the companies that we're looking at. They're like a gym membership, but they have CNC machines and lathes and wood shops and all this other stuff.
And all kinds
yeah,
of stuff.
3D printing. And so they have that. Well, everybody said, can we do it locally? Sure, we could, maybe. But why not take advantage of what we see in terms of the national expertise, folks that have a real clear focus on their mission and bring them here. So, I think for us, you will continue to see and should continue to see the city be really interested in those types of spaces. The real estate part, I think we can all figure out. The challenge for us is finding the operator. So if you have an operator like that, don't be shy to bring him to us and talk about him, because there is, without a doubt, that'd be a conversation that somebody in my position should be willing to have, any day of the week.
I'd like to pick up on that and compliment Purdue, because again, if we look at different universities and researchers, and as Steve alluded to, we've been around the country to view what's going on and what makes it work, and it is not buildings. No. I mean, we've talked about wet lab space. Yes, technically you need a fume hood and 500 square feet and utilities coming into that. That's a space. But what you need in an innovative area is you need someone who's going to be there, hold the hand of the entrepreneur, figure out what's going to work economically, be a concierge to that person. So it's the programming and the process and the people that are in the building making it work for the innovator or the entrepreneur. And as Adam said, we're working with Wexford for our development, nationally recognized development organization. And the reason, quite honestly, that we chose Wexford, they have a niche in this area of innovation space, but they can bring some of these providers with them into 16 Tech. So not only Tech Shop, but we're talking about Cambridge Innovation Center, which spun out of Cambridge, and now Tim Rowe, who's the president of that organization, has been here 3 or 4 times, and he's looking at space. And again, this is broad space. It's not just life science space. This is technology, manufacturing. You have, agriculture. It's broad. It's diverse. Lab Central is a spin out of Cambridge Innovation Center, where literally you have a place where you can rent or, a lab bench that's, 10 feet long. You don't have to rent the whole lab space. And so, but they also bring programming, they bring seminars, they bring outside speakers in, they hold your hand, they, do all of those kinds of things. So it's not the four walls and the floor and the ceiling. That's the entry. What really makes the difference, the secret sauce, if you will, are all these other things that you have to put together. And again, I compliment Purdue for doing a great job up in your tech parks.
Well, it's taken 50 years. Most of the real developments probably happened in the last 20, 25. But I always tell people when I talk to them around the state, because there are a lot of cities around the state that have an empty building in their downtown, and right away they want to start an incubator. And so I always give them that talk, and it's about the programming. It's not so much about the building, and the shortage also isn't in tech. There's lots of tech. The shortage really is successful entrepreneurs that have had an exit or two and then want to do it again, instead of going to the beach, somewhere and retiring. So I think it's programs to hold their hand, but it's also surrounding them with people that have been there, done that, know where the landmines are. And we're spending a lot of time, and many of you probably know John Hannock. He spends a lot of time interacting with venture capital on both coasts and here in the Midwest as well. And then building that mentor network among alumni that have been there, done that, want to help the next generation of entrepreneurs, be they in life science or whatever tech, to build a successful company.
And Paul makes a great point. I can tell you we're very proud of the investments we've made over the last 8 years. I'm almost as proud as the ones we haven't made in this kind of incubation space, because we've had a lot of opportunity, but none that really fit from an operations perspective, and we've kind of held out, and I think finally have landed the big one that'll make a difference. But I think that's critical for cities too, is to find a way to not jump at every opportunity, to make sure they've got that combination of geography and programming right so that it'll really work.
I think it's critical also around the state for cities to figure out what their expertise is, what the strength of their workforce is. It might be production, it might be ag, it might be something other than life sciences. So figuring that out from a city perspective, and then putting those tools like TIF, CTP, and others that are out there. Every time I hear somebody talking about taking TIF away right now, I about stroke out, because that's been critical in building our parks around the state, and the communities that they are in have benefited far beyond the investment that came through the TIF program in terms of jobs and other additions to the local economy. So those kinds of tools, I think, are critical, and then for the city to figure out what they want to be.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and we've already kind of coming up on our time, but we do want to take some time here at the end for questions that anybody in the audience may have. Connie has a microphone. If anybody has a question for any of the panelists, or a comment for that matter.
So two questions for David and for Steve. First, congratulations on the TIF vote last night, an investment of multiple organizations and people, the three of you on the stage there, just a huge milestone and an objective. So David, first for you, now you have a milestone that's been achieved to establish a place that you, as you're working with recruiting those researchers in the metabolic territory that you can point to. On a parallel path, what does that look like now? How does that work when you're out to recruit that human capital to come to Indianapolis? What does that look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
It's a great question. Up to this point, literally until we moved into even our interim facility in the BRTC building, just over a month ago. October 5th was when we moved in, and that is our, we're anticipated home for let's say the next 3 years until this permanent facility gets built at 16 Tech. That's made all the difference in terms of people actually now wanting to come to visit. Before it was theoretical, it was too virtual. You could show them on a piece of paper what was going to happen, but until you can kind of hold their hand, walk them into a building and say, here's the space, here's your lab, here's the collaboration space. Oh, by the way, let's see how close we are to IU Medical School, and we drive them up to Purdue every once in a while and show them Lilly. And so just having this and pointing to it and literally standing them in the center of what's going to be now 16 Tech makes all the difference in the world, because they can see it. Now, they still want to know how much money have you raised, and what kind of projects can I work on, and that kind of thing. But at least they can now start to see where they will be. And just having that makes all the difference to in the world. And the good thing for us, being sort of now on the northern boundary of 16 TAC, everything's going to occur essentially south of us. We don't have, I tell people, we're on the 50-yard line of 16 TAC, because we have the best view of what's going to happen. And so we've got a little war room created where we've got the renderings of what all the buildings are going to look like and what the master plan is going to look like. So when we bring these people in, we literally can stand at the window and start to point to things and say, look, this is going to happen here and here and here. And they all of a sudden can see it and get excited about it.
Steve, for Eli Lilly, share with the audience how your group has been a huge contributor towards transforming what happens inside the four walls in terms of creating really a workplace environment that spurs innovation and collaboration, not just only in administrative and operations, but research, and not just here at corporate campus in Indianapolis, but really across the whole organization.
Yeah, so, gosh, a number of years ago, we attacked the workplace from an admin perspective, as far as opening it up, being collaborative. I don't have a desk, I don't have an office. And so that took, 4 or 5 years to really get, quote, accepted. If you talk to some Lilly people today, some of them still don't accept it, but it's reality, so they have to live with it, right? But so in taking that, we try to apply it to the research side, and most likely spaces are our leased spaces, because that's where we can have the influence. It's kind of away from some places, although you're doing some things, I know, on our campus with Flex Labs and some other things that are hopefully helpful in the future as we need to change quickly. But as far as in the research places, like out in New York, our site out there, we created labs that were very collaborative, also office space that was very collaborative, so that they all kind of work as one, and also didn't need to own everything. So a lot of that back office support, whether it's for services, for other types of needs that we have outsourced those. So we're not trying to own everything. But that in itself has created a collaboration with folks outside of our organization. We're doing that in San Diego right now with designing our building in a fashion where we can invite people into certain areas to work with us. And part of that has to be obviously the agreements that are put in place with those types of entities, but you also have to have the space that allows that to happen in the area. And so our team is really focused on working with people who can help identify what those things are and what's appropriate, what will lead that.
I'm a young entrepreneur, or at least I still think I'm young, but how do you create an environment? I've been out to the coasts, right? The big thing with Indiana, and I'm not trying to be critical of it, is creating an environment for youth, right? Because those are guys that'll stay up all night and work all night. They don't have to go home to families. I have a family of my own, and it gets hard as you get older. How do you create an environment to attract young, innovative people to stay in Indiana or come to Indiana from the West Coast? I have many friends out there. They went out there to be innovative. They have kids now, and they're dying to come back to Indiana, and they're stuck there, right? Because they bought a house that's, a multi-million-dollar complex, right? Stuff like that. So how do you create this environment and attract this youth to here?
So, I think you latched onto what Indianapolis's real advantage is, right? We're not trying to be the next Boston or the next Silicon Valley. We're trying to take the elements of, our industries that are very unique and authentic to us and create that kind of ecosystem and community around them. But I think there's really two things from a youth perspective, and I'd say under 35. A lot of the building that's gone on downtown has been oriented at that. And I'll give Michael Huber, who had my job a few years ago, a lot of credit for recognizing that and saying, from a talent attraction standpoint, the city really has to create a vibrant downtown, which is where people want to live. They want to be able to live, walk, play, that whole thing in one area. So, we've seen a tremendous amount of investment over the mayor's term in those kind of multifamily mixed-use projects that are now sprouting out. So whether it's Cityway, which we just announced the second phase a couple weeks ago, or the Market East District, I think those are going to be the areas that really have the vibrancy. That will be much different than things were 10 years ago or 13 years ago when I moved to Indianapolis. So I think from that kind of under 35 perspective, you're there. However, when you look at folks who want to come back, the kind of expat movement, and TechPoint I know has a program focused just on that for entrepreneurs who are people who live out on the coast who want to come back. I think we really have to leverage what our unique assets are, which is housing's relatively affordable. We're one of the most affordable housing markets of the top, 25 metros in the U.S. And it's a great place to raise a family. So for us, one of the transition points, again, I think that'll bridge this administration and the next is how do you find a way to create single-family residential spaces in or around downtown that people want to live in? Because, no knock on the exurbs, but it's hard to get people who came from, a highly dense urban environment and convince them to go live in Carmel. It's not necessarily always what they want to do. So how do we create a diversity of single-family housing options? But for us, I think it's really a combination of the investments we've already made, and then as we start to expand out in the neighborhoods, the quality of life stuff that matters. And I think it matters for everyone. It's single family, quality single family housing, both on an affordable and a market rate scale, education and safety. I mean, you knock those three things out of the park, we let our really great companies and entrepreneurs do what they do well, and I think we'll continue to have a very dynamic environment that's attractive to some of these companies. And we continue to see that. I mean, there are certain functions, that Indianapolis is highly competitive for on a tech life sciences environment. There are others that we're not because it's just not our strength. But I think, if you look at the investments that have been made, I totaled them up the other day. It's probably close to $250, $300 million that's went in downtown, and that could be on the low side. That's all been aimed at trying to find a way to keep that young talent from a residential perspective.
I think it's also interesting that the young people today that are graduating often move to where they want to live to find a job or find a job once they get there. It's kind of flip-flopped, So when I graduated decades ago, it was about finding the company you wanted to work for and then moving there. It's my kids now that are in college and recently graduated, it's the other way around with that generation. They want to live, that whole live, work, play dynamic is kind of flipped from what I understood when I graduated.
And I'll give a little stay tuned. Infrastructure is a big piece of this. The cultural trail is one of the things. $63 million, the city originally didn't put any money in it. I think if you went back, everyone was very risk averse. We're looking at I would say stay tuned for potential expansion of the cultural trail where the city could be a partner. And I think it's those kind of assets that again are very unique to us that'll create a different kind of environment, unique environment to Indianapolis than really anywhere else.
Got a couple quick questions. As it relates to 16 Tech, you mentioned 20 to 50 employees. Is there, just for clarity purposes, is there an introductory zone within there for ideas? They don't even have a lab yet. They're going to start, or is your target for 16 Tech really a company that's just at its beginning stages at 20 to 50 employees?
Well, that was probably my number, and I threw that out in terms of where we tend to see a lot of the growth.
We from one to
50.
hundreds. I mean, it really is going to be, and this is part of the secret that you learn from going around the country and seeing these ecosystems and how they evolve, you want to be able to hold on to that talent. You don't want to see somebody innovate as a startup and then go to Ireland or go to California or someplace like that. So you actually want to have a mix of sort of infrastructure and programming capability so you can hold on to them. So the idea around 16 Tech is to have a dense, mixed, group of facilities and programming to accommodate that.
And my second question is really about the business itself. You can have incredibly strong and talented scientists, but legal, accounting, HR issues. Do you have some sort of resources available to those startup companies that may not have that experience or internal resources?
Well, again, differentiating between the IBRI, the bioscience research, which I'm responsible for, and 16 Tech. Within the IBRI, for our own institution, for our researchers, yes, we'll have small staff, but again, if we can outsource it, we'll outsource it. But we've got, IP lawyers and other folks that are going to help us in terms of determining our policies and practices to support our scientists that are part of the IBRI. When it comes to 16 Tech as a broad sort of community that will have hopefully multiple entities, we're hoping that Barnes Thornburg sets up an office in 16 Tech, and Figure Baker Daniels and all the other law firms and accounting firms and everybody else would actually be there in, let's say, the CIC facility where people are going to be running up and down the hallways, the entrepreneurs, and they're going to need that kind of service.
And what CIC has said is if you put all these people in one place, everybody else will come.
Right.
They're pretty quick to figure it out that they're going to need those service providers, and they end up being around there.
That's true, and it gets back to the ecosystem. And really, what you become, or what we've become, is connectors.
Right.
Really to those people, and making sure that the earliest stage companies get the help with their business model, make it scalable, repeatable, those kinds of things. The gazelle companies, the ones that are growing fastest and adding the most companies or jobs to local economies, that they have the support they need in terms of economic gardening and other tools that are out there. And then the bigger companies also have connections, or as they get traction and start to scale, they have connections to bigger sources of capital to help them grow exponentially, hopefully.
If you go and visit what the CIC, the Cambridge Innovation Center equivalent is in Cortex, which is in St. Louis, it's not called CIC, it's called at 480 or something like that. It's a 6-story building, probably about 150, 200,000 square feet. You walk in on the first floor, and there are the tech transfer offices for Washington University, University of Missouri, St. Louis, and SLU. Across from a brew pub. And then you've got Boeing's high tech development group. Those are the tenants on the first floor. You go up to the second floor, and it's a bunch of startups and incubator or startup entities. I mean, probably 50 companies. And then you go up to the third floor, and there's all the law firms and the accounting firms and everybody else who sort of supports what's on the second floor. So it's that kind of environment, it's that kind of building that we're in place that we're talking about creating there at 16.
It's like a buzz.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard to describe in tangible terms, but in these real vibrant, high-tech ecosystems, there's a buzz that develops, and creative, smart entrepreneurs, from new to serial entrepreneurs, like that environment. They feed off of it. They feed off the creativity of it, and they want to stay, and it ends up hopefully attracting more people to your community.
Just one quick question, kind of to stretch our minds a little bit. I just recently read a nice essay from Bill Hudnett about leadership skills and the importance of how our civic and corporate leaders kind of lead us in different directions. And I know he was talking about his leadership in the 70s and 80s. The focus was on the sports industry and bringing sports and our stadium and the Colts, of course, to Indianapolis. And I know now we're discussing LifeSciences, which was really discussed 10, 15 years ago. So I guess my question is there any ideas percolating now that we might be talking about for the younger generation, maybe 10, 15 years from now that Indianapolis and our leaders might be leading us to?
Well, you hit upon what I told my kids. So 35 years ago, I was a sophomore at Wabash College working for Dave Shane, who was running the transportation for the Pan American Games. Because Indianapolis decided they wanted to be the amateur sports capital of the world. That was 35 years ago. And you think of what good came out of that vision and that notion that we want to plant our flag to be an amateur sports capital of the world, and think of all the things that have happened leading up to the Super Bowl coming here and all the other wonderful assets and entities, the NCAA, everything that's here. And we really put ourselves on the map because of that vision and that flag in the ground. We are trying to do it. I told my kids, I gave them, they had friends come from Boston and said, Dad, give them a tour of Indianapolis. And I literally drove them around. And Indianapolis is great because you can go around it 3 times in about 15 minutes and point out all of these facilities and all these things that happen. We are trying to do the exact same thing with what we're talking about at 16 Tech. We're trying to plant a flag that says we want to be one of the most innovative communities in the country and states in the country. And as Adam alluded to, we can't be Boston, and we shouldn't even try to be Boston, because we don't have MIT, and we don't have Harvard, and we don't have what Boston has. And we shouldn't try to be San Francisco, because we're not San Francisco and Silicon Valley and what they have. But we are Indiana, we're Indianapolis, we got great life science companies. I describe them as the Noah's Ark. We got one of everything. We got one of everything, and they're global leaders in what they do, and we got great universities. But there's not sort of that flag that's been planted in the ground around innovation to touch upon the talent of the future. The next generation and the generation after that, they're looking for a place to go to first and then figure out how to make a life out of it. And so if we can create that kind of place with 16 Tech, and again, it's just the epicenter. It's going to have ripples all the way through the community. But that's exactly what we're trying to do, is mimic what happened 35 years ago with becoming the amateur sports capital of the country.
And I'll say real quickly too. I think we're not going to get away from sports, right? It's made us who we are. It's something we'll always have to keep. I think we're like any good business, diversifying to some extent at this point. But what has really made Indianapolis successful, going back to the sports strategy, is where you've had this opportunity for government, the corporate community, and the philanthropic community to come work together. And I think where you see historically, and where you see in this instance, and where we'll see in the future, the areas where Indianapolis is really successful is where you can get the 3 kind of pillars to that foundation together to make a decision as to this is the right way to move on. And we've kind of established what our brand is relative to sports, and we go through this for those of you who are involved in the community and economic development strategy that the Chamber's working on. That's part of what they're figuring out is what of our brand and how does Indianapolis brand itself. But to some extent, we've got one large anchor, and now we're figuring out what that second one is. And though for some of us who are on the deal end, like for me, this ends tomorrow, right? Somebody on the government side gets to work on the next one. There's going to be another 10, 15, 25 years worth of work that's going to be necessary to really build this up. And hopefully folks are thinking about it. I'll put a plug in for the mayor. I think we do a lot on charter schools and education. We do a lot on electric vehicle, and the way that Indianapolis looks at mass transit could be a model for other Midwestern cities. There are a lot of different things there. But this is, when you look, and we've talked about it a lot in the mayor's office, from a legacy perspective, that'll be one of the things that I think will far outlive this administration in terms of what it was able to execute in this particular area.
Somebody asked about recruiting and what it takes. When people who are not familiar with Indianapolis and the state of Indiana start to get to know it, and they see what a community it is. Boston is not, I lived there for 10 years. It's got pockets of community, but as a whole, it's not a community. It's a very competitive, cutthroat environment, believe me. Same in San Francisco, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you tell people who come here, look, when the community decides to do something, they do it, and they do it well. And if you want to be a part of it, you're going to have support and people that want to work with you. And the fact that the city council, thinking about it last night, that it was 23-0, there wasn't a dissenter to that. So from the mayor's office saying we're all in, to the city council saying we're all in, to Governor Pence putting $25 million to get this thing going, to the stakeholders from an IBRI perspective. It's without a doubt, everybody is doing their part to see that this is successful. And that makes all the difference in the world when it goes to describe it to people. And that's part of, I think, the message that we should take forward is, look what we're doing here, and we're all in it together. It's very unique. It's a very unique opportunity.
Good morning, Akila Darden with Tri-City Construction. All this sounds exciting and innovative. How do we become your preferred contractor when we have all these spaces and you need them in 2.5 months or 2 months or a month for all these startups? As a contractor, we're excited, we hear it. How do we infiltrate and get to you all to be, hey, Tri-City can do it, call them, and we'll be on the spot getting it done?
She's working it.
Yeah. Well, you have to have that kind of approach. I you can't wait on it to come to you. So applaud you for saying that. I think it really is just communicating with the people that are in our facilities, and that's Paul Macy, and he's out because he had hip surgery. So be patient. Others that are in the local environment, wherever it is, that you just kind of make your brand known. It's shots on goal. It's continuing to ask, and I think it's all about a lot of marketing is relationships, of course. So it's finding out exactly who the right people are, and then staying in contact, and we don't always, we typically put things out for bid and look for 3 competitive bids and go from there. But if we're in a hurry, a lot of times we'll just go with a company we know that has done it before, can get it done, and it's a decision made in that way.
I'll just state the obvious: come to real estate people events.
Thank you, Sean.
I think that's a great question, and the thing is, my experience, a lot of the life sciences folks or healthcare folks, they kind of want to soak in their environments. They want to build a trust and understand their issues, the trends. One of my colleagues here be able to understand where the puck is going for them. So there's other entities in the area, and to all these points up here about the collaborative nature, we find that very much so, by the way, in the brokerage community here. I know it was that way in Minneapolis, other towns, Boston, whatever, not so much. We try to all cooperate a lot here. So things like BioCrossroads, things like IHIF, these are associations that are meant to champion the relationships and champion the efforts of our industries here, and would encourage you to participate in those.
Donna Borgerding with Bully and Andrews, and I don't normally speak like this, but I just want to applaud you guys because I've been a part of this initiative since 1994 when I worked for IDOC. So it was the wish of the governor to have the Life Sciences Initiative at that time, and it has only expanded, and it is very exciting to see all the collaboration of finally the city, the state, the biopharma companies coming along, biostorage, all of them for so many years, and IHIF, Kristen Jones. It's just really cool to sit here and hear that it's finally becoming a actual reality, because there's been a number of governors that this has been a wish of theirs. We saw it for many years ago, and how California had it, and all the entrepreneurs that are coming this way, they're finally seeing it. So I just want to applaud you.
I think it really takes top-down leadership. I see that at Purdue with President Daniels, with Dan Hassler leading PRF. I think you really, they have a vision, and this probably carries over from when he was governor. Right. I think that, and the question is not, well, or the statement is not, well, we never did it like that before. It's all about how do we do it, and we're not going to do it right every time, but I think that in this community and in the state in general, we have some pretty smart people that know how to make business work and can work through the issues, and then it always costs twice as much and takes twice as long as you think it's going to, but hopefully not. That was a negative to end on, wasn't it?
Well, I'll add just one
Turn
last
that
piece.
around.
I think the reason these folks are coming here on the coast is because they're beginning to see the very thing that you stated. And at the end of the day, all of us here are here to support that entrepreneur who's out there trying to solve a problem in industry, in the community, and find a paying customer.